Hello everyone and welcome to today's session. We are meeting today in a scenario when the world is fighting COVID pandemic and the solution to the problem is obscured by the overcast. Most of the governments around the globe are realizing that the economic activities have to resume in the overall interest. In light of this, we have lined up three interesting topics for you together with ASA and Associates and Singhania and Partners. Belgium-Luxembourg Business Association is a privileged networking platform for businesses having an association with Belgium or Luxembourg. We strive to help companies to expand their business through advocacy, promotion, and knowledge dissemination. ASA and Associates is a full-service firm of corporate strategists, auditors, tax advisory experts, and financial and marketing analysts. They are working with businesses across the globe for over 3 decades in developing, monitoring, and integrating their business plans. Singhania and Partners is a prominent full-service law firm with offices across the country. The firm has established itself as an expert in corporate dispute advisory. The firm clients include large and medium businesses, several startups, Fortune 500 companies, public sector undertakings, and various ministries. The topics lined for today are highly relevant and talked about. We have kept an interactive approach for the presentation of this webinar, and that is the reason it is being held as an online meeting and not on a webinar platform. We requested for questions from our members, and the same has been passed on to our experts for their discussion during their talk. We have endeavored to keep the conversations open and relevant. Viewers are free to ask questions by raising their hand or sending a query via the chat box. Viewers accessing this webinar on their desktop can use Alt plus Y on Windows or Option plus Y on Mac to raise their hand. The questions will be replied at the end of the presentation. A recorded version of this webinar will be available and Preeti will share a link with all the attendees. And now I will request Mr. Rajiv Bhavan, President BLBA, to kindly introduce the speakers and moderate the session. Enjoy the session. Over to you, Rajiv.
Thank you very much, Amit. So a warm welcome once again to all of you, all the members, associates and friends of the BLBA. As Amit said, and I think it's probably just to reiterate it once more, that we are all going through this really extraordinary times and probably in our living memory, when nearly the whole of the humanity is confronted with probably the same problem, the same crisis in front of them. And it just goes to show that what is the depth of the crisis, but it also has an opportunity that going forward, a cooperation is a much better way, and a better understanding of everything involved is a much better way to go forward in the future. We have an additional privilege that most of the speakers today are already people whom we know very well, and that's an additional benefit for bringing their expertise to members of the BLB and friends of the BLBA. The three subjects that we have chosen today, as Amit also just mentioned, are one, the liquidity management in terms of COVID-19, contractual arrangement and the role of force majeure, and then thirdly, the company law issues in COVID-19. The illustrious panel that we have today, people who are very, very knowledgeable and knowing their particular subjects, so I start with Sandeep Khanna. Mr. Sandeep Khanna is a director with the strategy consulting with ASA and Associates. He brings over 30 years experience in leadership positions with various vertical knowledges on strategy, business management, turnaround management. And he's held leadership position in various marquee companies like Tata's, ICI, Shell, etc. So we're very privileged to have Sandeep's experience here. Then we have Mr. Sundeep Gupta. Sandeep Gupta is a friend and somebody whom we know very well and who has got a great deal of knowledge on the subject. Sandeep is a partner on accounting and business support on indirect tax at ASA and Partners. And he has over 25 years experience across industry and consulting in setting up accounting practices, cross-border treasury management, M&A and outsource functions of the finance function. We also have with us two luminary legal experts headed by Mr. Ravi Singhania from Singhania and Partners, managing partner. Ravi is an alumni of SRCC and Law College Delhi. He has a great expertise in corporate and dispute resolution. And he was, in fact, Ravi was also conferred the National Law Day Award by the former PM of India. And he has authored a host of books, on contracts, on employment law, etc. Along with Ravi, we also have Mr. Vikas Goel, senior partner with Singhania and Partners. Vikas heads the dispute resolution vertical, and he has got a tremendous knowledge and experience and has been appearing regularly before the Supreme Court, the High Court, and the various appellate tribunals on various issues related to arbitration, litigation, and is also the recipient of the Atal Smriti Award in memory of the late Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Lastly, but not the least, to complete the panel is Himanshu Srivastava. Himanshu heads the business advisory vertical in ASA. He leads in particular the Japan desk at ASA, and end-to-end business strategy has been his forte, and project management, and also the facilitation of the foreign business entry. So we're really, really grateful to this illustrious panel for giving the time and the energy. And of course, I must mention to Kim. Kim has been outstandingly in coordinating the whole thing along with Amit. So I must make a mention of that at the outset. I would, Sandeep, Mr. Khanna, would you like to make any initial remarks before I come to the questions? Is there any points that you would like to mention at the very outset?
Well, up to you, Rajiv. I mean, if you want me to give a brief introduction, I can do that. If that would just help to get the ball rolling.
Yes, yes.
So, we've been doing a few webinars on the subject of liquidity in the last 7 to 10 days, myself and Sandeep Gupta. And I kind of focus on sales forecasting. So the way we viewed this entire subject in the context of the pandemic, and given that liquidity is so critical, is to look at proper sales forecasting, because you don't want a lot of your precious cash to get held up in stock, nor do you want to be so ultra risk averse that you end up ceding your market share. So, finally, frankly, for a kind of the general subjects like sales forecasting, there's no magic bullet in such uncertain times. So you very kindly introduced me, having worked in Shell for 20 years, but I could have bet my all the salary I've earned in the last 20 years, I could have bet that and probably lost it if somebody had told me that a barrel of oil would be available in the US for negative $37. So that's sales forecasting for you in such an uncertain scenario. Nevertheless, to reduce the uncertainty as much as we can, I'll just make 3 brief points. One is that any sales forecasting, or when you have a business outlook, it has to be sector specific. We cannot have a general, one size fits all. There are some sectors which are reasonably safe. We've seen that, healthcare, pharma, I thought was safe yesterday, though I read that their sales went down in April. But, pharma, essential logistics, power generation, agriculture staples, those seem to be safe. And then there are these very high, very risky sectors, like, as we all know, airlines and related sectors, hospitality, oil and gas related to transportation, real estate. So it depends which sector you are in when you are looking at looking at the year out, the year ahead. And clearly, if you're in one of these very high risk sectors, then sales forecasting is a non-issue, because then what you want to survive. You desperately need cash to survive. So the big question is, where will you get your funds from? That's the bigger issue. Second point is that, if it may help, that when you're doing the practical exercise, I think we've lost the first quarter. Clearly, we've lost the first quarter. So you're looking at 9 months, or even less than 9 months. because by the time your supply chain cranks up, and by the time the supply chain of your suppliers or your component providers, depending on the sector you are, cranks up, it could be even less than 9 months. So that needs to be reflected in whatever sales forecasting you are doing. And then finally, just to make one more point, with my little bit of the experience that I have, it's time to start talking to your trade. You must be talking to your customers and your customers' customers, the end consumers, because they have their ear to the ground. And you can get beneficial insight by speaking to them, really as of yesterday. Secondly, in this scenario, you can't be taking your marginal customers along with you. You can't be doing business with customers or distributors or traders who are tardy with their payments or who are negative, let's say, at gross margin level. So you have to take that difficult call, not just with these marginal customers, but also with marginal products. This is not the year to be really doing business with them. One or two more points I just mentioned that you need to take into account while looking at your business or estimating your business in this truncated year, what your suppliers are doing. So if they are not ready as on, let's say, 1st July, then your business is impacted. So you need to be very clear on that. Seasonality, everybody will take into account. But do also take into account pent-up demand. There might be a surge in pent-up demand in a few months from now. So that's something which needs to be borne in mind. So having done all this, make sure that we don't want too much cash to get locked up in inventory, and nor do you want to start ceding your market share. So having done all this estimation, the main point that I've been making in all these webinars is that at the end of it, if your fixed cost is not being covered, then you need to be looking at every single line item of your P&L as a decision to be made. So whether it is depots, if you need to rationalize your depot capacity, or you want to start doing your logistics yourself if that is cheaper, looking at co-working options, outsourcing finance and HR, supply contracts, etc. And of course, even people costs. You need to be very considerate with your people. That goes without saying. But at the end of it, that's also a hefty number in your P&L. So that also will need to be addressed. So that's basically what I would just say to get the ball rolling. In the main headline from my side would be, if having done the estimation in a conservative manner, you don't want to be ambitious in this year. So err on the side of being conservative. Having done that, if you're not covering your fixed costs, then every single line item of the P&L, and it is self-evident, I suppose, is a decision to be made. So I'll just stop over there. So you're looking at various line items of the P&L, plus you're also looking at new business models. So obviously people are moving to online transactions. So organizations will have to consider new business models. There are new costs to be considered in plants, for example, with social distancing. New costs will come in. So bear in mind your new costs, bear in mind new business models. Or on the side of being conservative, if you're not covering your fixed costs, look at every single line item of your P&L as a decision to be made.
That's an excellent advice, Sandeep. Sandeep, I have just one follow-up point, and not just because you come with so much of corporate experience, but one of the mistakes often companies end up doing. I mean, it's not a mistake, but probably it's part of what we consider a normal way of working. Is that there is a lot of WIP and inventory that gets accumulated, particularly if you are a manufacturing company over a period of time. I mean, how important it is to convert your inventory in such a period, to try and convert your inventory to cash, and also to have a much better control on your stock and WIP management. Because at the end of the day, in such a deep cash issues that one is facing, I think it's extremely important to kind of scourge around and look at every available option that you have to convert your, not just, to get the receivable angle sorted out, but also to make sure that, your dead stocks or even your inventories and WIP is actually converted and kept to the bare minimum. Is that something important?
So Rajiv, that, to your point, is more important this year, in the coming year, than it has ever been in the past. and I think than it ever will be in the foreseeable future.
Fair.
So absolutely crucial that that inventory level is converted into cash, because we need all the cash that you can lay your hands on.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sandeep. I think it's well. Obviously, we'll come back. One question from one of our members. I don't know. Is Raghav on the call? Okay. Maybe I will say it on behalf of Raghav. The question that's for Sandeep Gupta. Sandeep, one of the questions that has been addressed is that some recent measures by the RBI on TLTRO, and I think what it probably wants to say is the targeted long-term rep ops. Now, this is, I believe it's a tool or a measure to increase the liquidity in the market. Frankly, to me and probably to quite a few of others, we do not understand what does it mean, what does it imply. So I would appreciate if you can elaborate how TLTRO will facilitate the liquidity and how it supports in particular the MSMEs and the smaller entities. Is that something, Sandeep, you can take?
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, I would like to take a few minutes to explain what this term actually means and what are the repo operations which Reserve Bank does, because then that would probably enable the participants who are not very well versed with the monetary policies or the RBI operations in terms of these measures. So repo operations are essentially nothing but a tool, one of the tools in the hands of RBI to either create more liquidity in the hands of the bankers or to suck out liquidity from the market by taking on the cash out of the banking system. And how this operates is, repo means a loan or a borrowing which the banks can do from RBI. So RBI lends to banks, and that's called a repo rate. It's a very low rate of interest. I mean, presently, I think it's about 4.5% or whatever. And this is done to inject more liquidity into the system. The reverse repo, on the other hand, means that to suck out liquidity, RBI will take loans from the bankers. So the bankers lend to RBI, thereby relinquishing a lot of liquidity from their in-house systems. And why it is done, to explain, there could be suddenly a bank comes into a lot of deposits suddenly. So maybe, over a period of 1 week, they have come out with, let's say, 500 crores of deposit for one reason or the other. And they do not foresee that their loan books will grow to the extent in the next 10 days or 14 days. So then they park this money with RBI in terms of a reverse repo, right?
Yeah.
On the contrary, if the bankers do not have enough deposits with them to substantiate any borrowings, and they come out with, let's say, a need for 100 or a 200 crore borrowing, then they take on the money on borrowing from RBI and give it to the needy borrowers, the industrialists, the MSME. So this is how the repo and the reverse repo operates. Care to note here is that these are short-term operations. These are 14-day cycles, which keep on operating. So every time it's like a rollover of 14-day period. Coming on to this now, for the first time, the targeted long-term repo has been done by RBI as a version 2. There was a version 1, but that was not a targeted. That was just a long-term repo operation, LTRO. This one is a TLTRO. So what they have done, RBI has said that 50,000 crores will be released under these long-term repo operations, with conditions of that the money will be targeted towards particular usage. And how they have done it is that banks who will take on borrowings from RBI under this operation will have to, within 30 days, pass this down by investing into specified instruments of debt, which could be commercial papers or which could be non-convertible debentures or things like these, of NBFCs.
I see.
So they are creating more liquidity in the hands of NBFCs by this method. And when this happens, then obviously the NBFCs will not take on this money from the bankers and sit on it, because then that's like their ROI is going to be negative. So what they are then in turn going to do, they are going to go aggressive into the market in terms of extending further borrowings to the actual business houses and all Another step in this specific TLTRO 2.0, what the RBI has said, that 50% of the borrowing taken on by the NBFCs will have to be, by the bank, will have to be graded into a certain percentage into microfinance NBFCs, certain percentages into NBFCs having an AUM, asset under management, up to 500 crores, and a certain percentage into more than 500 crore AUM NBFCs. So this is the way they have targeted bringing liquidity into the market. But this does not automatically mean that all the MSMEs would be, getting a lot of money with them. There now, probably the hunger for the bankers and their risk appetite will also mean a lot from the NBFC's perspective, that they should not be conservative now to extend loans only to grade A companies only, because these are times when everybody is into a deep trouble. So there probably the government, to my mind, and RBI to my mind, should also come out with some kind of a credit guarantee scheme to enhance the risk appetite of the NBFCs for a proper flow of these disbursement of funds. But yes, on a broad level, liquidity is created by this means. The amount is 50,000 crores for this 2 tranche. And there are more such measures which are in the anvil for MSMEs, specifically MSMEs.
Specifically for MSMEs.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I hope that answers the question on a broad level. But
very clear, because to be very honest, the question has been answered, and I think you answered it very comprehensive. Okay. Another additional question, maybe Sandeep, you can take yourself, has been asked by one of the members, is that although it sounds very simple, it says, what tools does a supplier or a vendor have when his clients are not paying the outstanding dues? So, I mean, the problem is obviously the supplier or the vendor has a problem, because even the client has a problem. That's the reason that he's not able to square up his dues. But his question was more that in such a scenario, what kind of an option do you have in front of you? And maybe if you can elaborate with your experience, or give some pointers on that, which are easy to understand here.
Yes, it's a very, very pertinent question, I would say, in today's times, because these times are like unprecedented times. There are no straight-cut answers. There is no rule book which has been built up by anybody in the world for this, what has been happening. I mean, if these were normal times, and if your, let's say, customer is not paying, you had access to a lot of options. Sure. One of the options which existed till about a week back was obviously to pull the customer into insolvency and bankruptcy procedures, and thereby coming to probably force him to come on the table and then negotiate certain terms and arbitrate and get your money in. Unfortunately, considering this very weird situation which this virus has created world over, the government of India has rightly decided, I would say, to protect again the MSMEs from unnecessary harassment, that the provisions of IBC has been kept in abeyance for the next 6 months. Having said that, I think for people who are facing this particular difficulty of their customers not paying, I think first and foremost, the person facing this difficulty should assess whether their customer is in a genuine difficulty, or are they using this as a leverage point, to utilize that cash somewhere else. And the only option left, which is the best course of action now, is probably to engage into a deeper and a meaningful communication with your customers in terms of understanding their difficulties, in terms of, understanding what is the best way out, maybe not pushing them too much in terms of realization of the entire set of dues, but, impressing upon them the need that even a graded payment to help them in their working capital cycle, as well as to help you in your working capital cycle. Because ultimately, most of the relationships on the commercial contracts, whether it is one end of the supply chain of the procurement side or the other end of the supply chain on the customer side, they are long-term relationships by and large. And it's more or less a symbiotic relationship. If the vendors don't pay, the customers don't pay, then your vendors don't get paid. And it's a complete link. And that's where this relationship now has to be probably exploited to the largest possible extent in terms of partnering with each other and standing in times of need towards. And that would be the best course of best option to realize your pending dues. Because if you simply force him and they do not genuinely have any money, then what will happen? You can't pull them into bankruptcy. There is no other, to my mind, I mean, the lawyers, illustrious lawyers on this panel could probably explain further, but you can take them to the court, but then court procedures will take a longer time. And what you're looking at is money in the short run within the next 14 days, 30-day period. So I think communication will be the biggest tool in everybody's hands as of now.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Sandeep. I will, with permission, now move to, and of course, I'll come back to Sandeep Gupta and Sandeep Khanna at any point of time when a question that comes in and needs to be addressed to both of you. I will move to Ravi and Vikas. Ravi, before I ask the questions, which I have a few of the questions for you, would you like to make any in general statements, just like Sandeep Khanna made? So it'll be great, if you can just to lay the parameters in front of the people.
Rajiv, what I would like to say is this current pandemic situation is unprecedented, as Sandeep and Sandeep Khanna and Sandeep Gupta both mentioned, and the legal system has also recognized that. Even to the extent that the courts are shut, only very urgent hearings are happening, and it's unprecedented that the Supreme Court is hearing matters in a video conference mode, which was still, the video conferencing facilities have been there since long, but they've never been used in our legal system. Equally unprecedented is something which a legal remedy which was available up till a week ago, and they've said that you cannot take the insolvency provisions right now to collect your dues. And a light provision which has happened right now is that the courts have said that we are extending the limitation period which was available to the parties, even if your due was an old due and was there for a long time and the limitation period was expiring. The Supreme Court has said that that stands extended for the period of this COVID-19. And in any case, the normal court hearings are not taking place and the matters are being, the next dates are being automatically generated for all matters. We are hopeful something should start in the near future, but till then it's a situation of animated suspension that we are all in, and we are awaiting for a better situation to arise to take this forward.
Fair enough. Thank you, Ravi. Ravi, one question that was there, and that was from somebody who has a large logistically backup warehouse, he operates warehouses in the NCR zone. And the question was that vis-a-vis warehousing, which is now probably also part in general of issues linked to the force majeure, are there any remedies to a lesser and a lessee? For example, at what stage do you actually invoke a force majeure? And what happens when a party issues a force majeure? After that, what happens? So it's not clear to some of them because, we use the terminology force majeure, but to a lot of laymen like us, probably it's not clear that at what stage do you invoke it? We do understand that, and I believe that, when I was doing a little bit of study myself, that in 2001, we had that famous foot and mouth epidemic, that happened in the world. And probably after that, not just the war and issues that were usually included in the force majeure as clauses, but they also started including the epidemics. And of course, the example that we're going through now with the coronavirus is not just an epidemic, but a pandemic on a global scale. So obviously it qualifies for that. But, at what stage when you have these kind of issues, how does anybody invoke a force majeure? And then what happens when a force majeure is invoked?
Rajiv, what needs to think about is that force majeure is a contractual provision where the parties have mutually agreed that in these circumstances, the party facing a force majeure situation would be excused from performance. They have started including epidemic as part of their provisions in the contracts, that in case of an epidemic, you would be excused. But one would need to see each contract in its commercial sense individually. a situation where I was to supply you goods would be different from a situation where I have an office building or a warehouse which is available for lease and human beings are there. The government is allowing essential goods and commodities to be sold and transported. But the tenant or lessee is saying, I can't pay you rent because I'm not able to sell any goods. That's a commercial hardship. Most likely, such a situation is not provided for in a force majeure clause. It says, in case of commercial hardship, you would not be liable for rent. And what do you do then? The landlord has a right to collect rent. The tenant has an obligation to pay the rent, but tenant doesn't have the money, or maybe for some of the goods which are stored there in a warehouse, they may not be able to move them because transportation is prohibited. But supposing he was allowed to, he says, if you're not paying me rent, you need to take out these goods and store them on the road because that is not prohibited. So what if you can't supply it in Delhi city or somewhere else, but you're enjoying my facilities, you're liable for rent. The bottom line of this at the end of the day would come down to, you'll have to mutually settle something halfway that you need these customers. Sure. You need to understand with your tenant that what is his problem, is a temporary situation. From a legal perspective, you have a right to collect. But if you can't go into solvency, then you go into the normal court process. What Sandeep just said is you're waiting forever to collect your money. And you need these tenants back again in some time. So different, whether it's malls, whether it's like, office complexes, whether it's warehouses, the landlords and tenants are somewhere agreeing midway that yes, this is a unique situation. But my next question to myself would be, for how long this people would do this?
Yes.
My partner Vikas, who's the litigator, Vikas, would you like to add something to this? I think he's on mute.
Yeah, Vikas.
Yes. See, what I want to add to what Ravi has said is that we should first of all understand the difference, or what exactly is the meaning of a force majeure clause. Because when we talk about, we see that all the contracts are governed by our Contract Act. But unfortunately, our Contract Act does not talk about force majeure at all. One of the facets of force majeure is definitely included there, where the contract becomes impossible of performance. Because whenever parties form a contract, they intend that there would be no such eventuality and they would rather be performing the contract. But they also make a provision in a situation where the contract, though has not become impossible, but yes, it has certain difficulty. It might need some kind of adjustment, suspension of obligation for the time being. In these kind of scenarios, we see in all big commercial contracts, especially, the clause with the heading force majeure is included. Now, force majeure is really a very big concept. It can be a situation of act of God. It can be a war situation. And essence of force majeure is something over which a party has no control. Now, of course, when they don't have any control, they cannot be blamed for that. Now, then what is also important is that as long as it is not a situation of impossibility, one must look at their own contract and see as to how the parties have bargained for themselves, as to what steps will they take. Like you asked about notice. One simple answer could be, you look at the contract, and if the contract says the notice has to be given within 15 days, it must be given within 15 days. Now, but today's scenario is such that it is not confined to a particular location. It is a worldwide parameter, and everybody knows about it. And to me, it looks like that even if he has delayed, he has missed that timeline, he can still put the party to notice. And later on in the court, they can take a plea that though it was not required, but still we gave because it was a well-known fact. So, so much things would depend on how the contract has been drafted. And my take is that in such a scenario, one must strictly see what exactly the contract says. And of course, so far as lease rental is concerned, in addition to what Ravi has said, a purely legal point is that in case of lease, actually, there is a right of enjoyment which is transferred to the lessee. So once that right is transferred and he is having that right with him, he can't say that I will not pay rent. Of course, what will happen in tomorrow's scenario where the pandemic period extends, as all the panelists are suggesting that mutual dialogue is the best option. But then one has to see the legality also. So broadly, what I want to highlight is, first of all, look at your contract, look at the law, and then try to be reasonable. Those are the points that I would like to highlight.
Very good, Vikas. Because one follow-up question is that from one of the members we had is that, can COVID-19 trigger force majeure clause automatically in all contracts? That means, imagine you had a contract and that had not specifically mentioned, because obviously nobody could foresee 3 months ago or even 4 months ago that we are going to be in the midst of such a global crisis. But because now it has happened, so can COVID-19 trigger force majeure automatically in all the clauses?
Yes, it can. If the contract does not talk about it, it still can be considered as a force majeure event. See, one has to remember that it is an event which is outside your control. Now, if the contract wanted you to give a notice, you should have given. But if the contract is silent, even if you have not given, it is a well-known fact.
Yes.
What is notice? Notice is where you put somebody to bring to somebody's knowledge a particular fact. But this fact is known to everybody.
Absolutely.
So the advantage of notice could be that you can spell out in your notice what exactly is the difficulty that you are facing. And subsequently, you can manage your litigation around that.
Sure.
Ravi, I'd like to.
Yes, please, Ravi.
I'd just like to add one more thing to this is that force majeure is a situation which is beyond your control. COVID-19 is obviously beyond your control, and whether it's an act of God or epidemic, it's a force majeure. But the key question in a contract is, would you be excused for performing your obligation because of this force majeure? Wherein the contract comes into play, and one would need to say, was this contemplated that such a situation which is beyond your control would excuse you from your performance of the obligation? That's one part. And the second part is, are you really not enjoying the benefit which you are granted under a contract, which would excuse you from paying your obligations? That is the key question. So these are again like questions which you have to see factually how it affects the contract. And though the term force majeure is almost applicable, but is it what was envisaged for an excuse of performance in the contract?
You know, I have also a lot of chat box messages popping up talking about force majeure, because this force majeure seems to have triggered a lot of questions from a lot of people. But Ravi, one question both to you and Vikas, one more, is that I'm just kind of putting my thinking hat that imagine now this, you know, we are in the middle of the crisis, but, you know, let's be honest, this is probably just the start of the crisis, you know, because we are still, you know, about 3 months into the crisis, or maybe 2 months into the crisis. We don't have a therapy in sight. We don't have a vaccine in sight. It's a long process. I know that the medical community is working breakneck, you know, around the world, you know, in order to get something, you know, going, you know, something that will either provide a relief, if not a cure, so that even if you're infected, you know, you come out of it, you know, so that's like a therapeutic or a cure that you get after you're infected. And obviously a vaccine would be ideal, because vaccine would basically allow you to build the necessary immunity not to get it. But imagine this thing drags on, and which it is quite likely. Then you have, let's say, a second wave of the crisis coming in, you know, 6 months down the road, another one coming down the road, because that's the way the viruses behave. You know, they have the second wave and the third wave and those kind of things. So what are the kind of guidelines that people should consider, you know, or should have there in their mind, knowing the situation is not something that's going to die away in a matter of 1 or 2 months. It probably will drag on for a good period of year. So what kind of built-in precautions that they need to take, in view of that, on a contractual management point of view? One thing which is clear is that obviously, there will be some clauses that will be inbuilt in lieu of this fact altogether. But in addition to that, would you advise anything else for the contract management? How do you actually, when you finalize those contracts, before you sign those contracts, are there any special provisions that you need to take into account? Because I can imagine, that, like for example, Magito, the company I'm associated with, we have a plant in Rajkot in Gujarat, but we restarted after 45 days, but you never know, maybe in 2 months down the road, there is again an issue and it's forced to shut down for another 2-3 months down the road with critical supplies held up, So are there some important guidelines or some advices between you and Vikas that you can share, what can be?
Let me just say one brief comment. This is where in business contracts, the help of a business analyst or consultant comes in to evaluate your risks. And something which you can evaluate, you can provide for in the agreement, that in such situations, what would be the position of the parties. Something like in a situation like COVID-19 kind of situation, people, specifically speaking the terms of the lease rentals, for certain businesses, they might say in case the lessee is unable to make commercial use of the property for no fault of its own, the lessee would not be obliged to pay rent. Versus a situation where most commercial leases contain a clause that in case the lessee is unable to use the premises because of a force majeure situation or any fault of the lessor, then they would not be obliged to pay rent. So one would need to think from a business strategy perspective as to what are the risks that you may envisage or how far can you go. The second stage would be the consulting or the negotiations which the party would have as to who is assuming that risk and how are you covering that language legally. So from that perspective, one would get to a provision which will have the drafting of force majeure or similar provisions in a contract as to how you are mitigating your risk or how you are ensuring that you have provided for those risks in your contract. Vikas?
See, only one comment that I used to add is that in many contracts, like reasonably a period of, if suppose the contract is for a larger period running into 2 or 3 years or 4 years period, then the force majeure clauses itself provide that if because of the suspension takes place for a more than a period of 6 months, then the parties will have a right to terminate the contract. So if the contract already takes care of that situation, then of course you have to be bound by that. But if supposing contract is silent on that aspect, then you have to see whether the contract has actually become impossible of performance. Let us say there is a contract for a shorter period for a supply of perishable goods.
Yes.
Now, maybe this contract for 6 months or whatever, substantial period is already over. One can say that I cannot manufacture or I cannot raise the product, etc. And there is no point. And the point that has to be borne in mind is that if it is an impossibility, you can bring the contract to an end. Otherwise, you will have to plead a defense that because of this, I could not take step in the time-bound manner, and I need some more time.
Right. Thank you very much. I think that at least helps, In any case, what it shows is that, whatever contracts are drafted or agreed to in the future going forward, I think it's better to be prudent and to kind of run it through at least an expert, from a legal understanding as well as from a judicial point of view, so that, all things are taken into account before, they are actually implemented or they are actually put into operation. I think it makes a lot of sense, at least. This pandemic teaches us that, better to err on the side of caution rather than anything else. I will now move to. Thank you, Vikas and Ravi. And of course, if there is any follow-up, we come back to you. I will move to Himanshu. And Himanshu, as we introduced, has been in charge of the Japan desk in ASA. And Himanshu has also been the person who has been heading the business advisory vertical and looks into the end-to-end business strategy. Himanshu, before I come to a couple of questions there, would you like to make a couple of comments or statements, or something that you would like to express? Please go ahead.
Yeah, so, as all my fellow speakers have rightly emphasized that, the crux is that these are unprecedented times, and no regulatory, except the National Disaster Management Act, there was no other act which could have really envisaged the kind of disruption the whole financial, not just financial, but every sector is witnessing. So, we've been witnessing a slew of measures which the government has been, announcing or putting new mechanism into place. Fellow speakers also mentioned about the insolvency and bankruptcy, amendments. A lot of amendments are being, dealt out by the government. So dished out by the government for various compliances. So in these times, which, the period is little uncertain, or maybe, they are here to remain for some longer time, they would definitely require that we, just change the way that we deal our businesses with. Digitization is one major factor which is going to impact us, and we are really talking, in this room, particularly through electronic measures. Similarly, a host of compliances are now going to be allowed through digital modes. There are new avenues of practices, which are going to emerge, and also, companies are going to take a different, totally a different, view of how they used to do business earlier and how they're going to do it now, both in terms from the business perspective as well as for consultants and service providers, lawyers, consultants. So these are really different times, and one should really remain abreast of what all changes or privileges are being allowed. So instead of getting panicked or disheartening yourself, it's important to kind of accept the reality and move forward with whatever the situation is providing us all as let's say people who are driving businesses in our respective domains. We should really pay attention to all such measures and handle situations according to an appropriate treatment as has been facilitated by the government. So in such areas, we've been doing a lot of webinars and giving a lot of talks on. In fact, a lot of our clients are now they were very discomforted with the fact that they were not able to see us, or they were not getting face-to-face meeting. But this crisis really given us opportunity that we are now able to connect to client in much better way, irrespective of the differences, whether it's India or outside India. So so this is how we will kind of change ourselves, our practices, and things are in a way, if you remove the restrictions that are there, or kind of the whole emotional aspects, I would think that business can get back to back on track. So we may just need to change our definition of new normal. Rest all is going to be handled automatically.
Excellent. Himanshu, since, and this is a question, more from myself to you, because I know you got a nose in the international affairs, and because of the, you head the Japan desk. But Himanshu, do you see that, obviously India has got phenomenal strengths, not just in manpower, in the quality of our manpower, in not just the intelligent people there, but also the fact that, we've got excellent systems, a democratic country. Of course, we have still long ways to go in lots of other things, but there are lots of positives for India. Do you see the way the COVID crisis has now shaped up? Do you see a lot of shift, probably, or at least in terms of a lot of interest from the global investor community to relook at India once again, because this is at least one country that provides a scale, a size to match with their aspirations, not just as a big market in itself, as a billion consumer market, but also in terms of the fact that it's got democratic structures and institutions. Not everything is perfect, but at least, we are what we are, and at least that's the positive element. So do you see that kind of thing going to happen? I hear a lot of that, but I thought from your side it'd be good to know.
Okay, so there are two things. As a consultant, I can tell you that yes, because our specialization is primarily helping multinational companies, and over the last I would say 6 weeks or so, 6 or 8 weeks, I would say the number of queries have really gone up, and I would not say that they are not looking at other jurisdictions or other options apart from India, but they are very, very keen. And if you were to, we were to believe the words of our, let's say, the Institute Managing Facilitation of Investment, if we really talk about the, let's say, words of Invest India, or even our ambassador in Tokyo. So I was attending a conference yesterday, of course, through webinar. And, we kind of noticed that they have a lot of inquiries from Japanese companies specifically, who are keen to kind of move their business, not just out of China, but in fact, they have realized that India has a lot of potential, and the way our Honorable Prime Minister and in fact the entire, executive machinery, administrative setup has really reacted to the situation. So it really shows a very mature, kind of a vision. So they are very keen they're very surprised as to how we could really manage it or contain it, this onslaught of this corona, but also the slew of reforms that the government is, announcing, plus the pro-investor image that has been projected over the last 6 to 8 weeks. It really is doing a lot of buzz in international markets, and there are a lot of companies which are keen not just to move their operations from China. That would, it will take, the relocation of business takes time, but there are new companies who were not previously looking at India because of so many other factors. But this has really shown it's a very bright window for India to tap onto these new opportunities. And I'm sure in near future, there would be a lot of businesses moving to India.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. And I'm sure if there are some questions that will come, we'll come back to you. I had just one follow-up question, one more for Sandeep Khanna. Sandeep, you're there, please.
Yes,
Sandeep, that was the issue which was addressed more from the point of view of your corporate governance, that, for example, if you are, let's say, the MD of a company, and let's say along with your board, if you were to say that, okay, what are the exactly 2 or 3 things that I should be most bothered at this particular stage, obviously you look at a dynamic risk assessment of your own business, and it's mapping, that my own business, where it is headed for, what are the issues which are involved. And of course, you will look at your financial going concern and continuity angles, those things, But besides that, and besides communicating with your team down the road, down the company, with the entire workforce and the team, what are the things that in a corporate governance point of view, you should be absolutely, handling, let's say you should be seized of those issues from a leadership point of view?
Well, from a leadership point of view, Rajiv, the one point I would make is that, and that's again with the bit of experience, a crisis like this, the CEO or the MD or whoever is the leader of the organization just cannot leave it to senior managers at this point in time, because they are in such situations usually reluctant to make bold decisions. So the leadership, the leader, the CEO has to take the bull by its horns in this situation. That's one. Secondly, we are already finding that CEOs, leaders, virtually they are engaging with their teams and keeping them motivated. So that's great. The motivational aspect is great, but equally important, perhaps even more, is to have really truthful and open and authentic communication with all stakeholders, mainly employees. But those are really critical aspects. Of course, apart from the other things that you mentioned, license to operate, your social responsibilities as far as you can fulfill them, shareholder returns, etc., etc. All those things are there. But one or two things which are key is that in this situation, don't lean too much on your senior managers. You need to be at the forefront because they are not going to make bold decisions. And secondly, have very truthful and open communication with all your stakeholders.
That's an excellent point. In fact, I think that point substantiates. I was watching CNN yesterday, Sandeep, and this guy Daniel Day O'Connor, who's the chairman of Gilead Sciences, because when they talked about remdesivir, the drug, that they talked about coming in as a panacea immediately, but then he came in and he said, look, we need to tone down our expectation.
That's right.
This is not like a panacea. This is not like a one size fits all thing. There are some benefits that is provided as a therapy, but we need to be extremely careful because, and I think it was a very honest disclosure coming from the CEO, because instead of just hampering to market forces, he talked about the reality, and I think that's a very good point. He said.
And only the CEO could have said that. I doubt if a marketing head or somebody else would have come out and be so upfront about it.
And he said it in front of Trump, which was all the more better. Okay. Well, that's excellent points. Amit, do you have a question on GST particular? Because you asked at the start of it, do you want to address Sandeep Gupta, please?
Yeah, Rajiv, Sandeep, I wanted to ask a question on the relaxation that government have announced on GST and various compliances related matter. So how have they really, the benefit so far has gone out, and what all compliances could be deferred or has to be urgently taken care of? At the same time, the payment of GST, I understand, have been deferred, but I also hear from my accountant that we need to file 3B, then only the liability will get adjusted. So in a way, that date has been extended, but the date for payment has not been really extended in a manner that it should have been. Only the interest rate has been reduced. So there's some confusion. I would like to kindly clarify on that. Okay, throw some light on that, please.
Yeah, sure. So there are various relaxations which the government has come out on the GST and other indirect taxes like customs front, but we'll talk about GST since you specifically asked about it. Now, first and foremost, the date of filing your monthly return has not been extended per se. They have only given you a relaxation to file your return up to a certain date. And if you file it up to that date, then the interest and the penalties for late fees would not be levied. Having said that, they have also in their own wisdom chosen to bifurcate the categories into large and small taxpayers. And by their definition, the large taxpayers are anybody who is exceeding a 5 crore annual turnover. For people below 5 crores, they have got ample time till almost the last week of June to pay their tax liabilities and file the returns for the month of February, March, and April. So they can actually use this as a means of tax financing to enhance their liquidity. But for the people whose aggregate turnover is greater than 5 crores, the government has given a relaxation period of only 15 days. So if you were supposed to pay your liabilities by 20th of March, you are now supposed to pay it by 5th of April. For the month of March, you were supposed to pay it by 20th of April. You can pay it till date. Today is the last date. So a 15 days relaxation has been given where you don't suffer any incremental interest. But they have said if you are not able to file by today, I'm taking this as an example, and you file it tomorrow, then you will be subjected to a reduced rate of interest from 18% to 9%, which will start from tomorrow only. So it's not like that you will pay interest for 16 days, you will pay interest for 1 day only. Provided you file and pay your tax returns for February, March and April till 24th of June. So if you do not file and pay and while I'm saying file and pay, because under GST, you cannot file your monthly return without discharging your tax liability.
Correct.
So filing is synonymous with paying your discharging your liability. If you do not file by 24th of June, and let's say you go on to 25th of June, then you lose all these privileges. So then you have to pay interest at 18%, and you will have to bear the late fee charges also. But these are only for the large taxpayers greater than annualized turnover of 5 crore. That's what they have done. What is the wisdom in this? I mean, only the powers that we can tell, but from my understanding and my little bit of interaction at the government level, I can say the understanding here was that the government also needs money. You would have read that the collections of March were 1,13,000 crores, and in April they dipped to 28,000 odd crores. So this was one of the singular reasons why, because the taxes were deferred. But having said that, this is the situation. Other than that, they have given various other relaxations that whatever timeline is falling due between 20th of March to 29th of June gets extended to 30th of June. So let's say you have got a notice for any kind of a hearing where the due date for filing a reply was 21st of March. You were unable to do it because your accountant couldn't reach office or whatever reasons. You have automatically got that timeline extended till 30th of June. You will not be penalized for non-filing of a reply. Similarly, any kind of other benefits which are there in terms of, if you look at the foreign trade policy, that has been extended in entirety by 1 year. So common for the service providers is the service export from India scheme. So if your timeline for filing for SEIS scripts was expiring on 31st of March, you have got an automatic extension of it for 9 months. Without any late fee, you can file it till December of 2020. So those are the kind of benefits, and there are various other procedural benefits also they have given in terms of, let's say, the GST audit, which was a much touted activity. They have raised that turnover threshold from 2 crores to 5 crores.
Right.
So anybody who's having an aggregate turnover of less than 5 crores need not get a GST audit done for financial year 2018-19. So that's a relaxation given. Similarly, for filing of these returns, as of now, the extended date of 30th of June, you need to file your GSTR 9, the annual return, and complete the audit report in 9C and file it by 30th of June, which looks very difficult as of now. The government, I'm sure, is considering of extending it. The date will certainly be extended. So these are the relaxations on a broad level. I'm just telling you, there are a lot more, but I will take a lot more time if I, go into it with every pointer.
Thank you so much, Sandeep. Manoj, you had mentioned that somebody raised a hand and he wanted to ask a question. Kindly, we can give that person the opportunity to raise that. Please go ahead. Is that Aman?
Hi. Yeah, Amandeep. Yeah, hi.
Yes,
first of all, I wish everyone a good health in this situation. So my question is to Mr. Sandy. As you discussed a bit previously, a bit about communication is important to the end customer right now, to force them to cash in into the economy right now. So in regards to services, that's more very much fine. But when it comes to the established markets and the concept called bricks and mortars, the shopkeepers, the small enterprises, the small businesses who are totally relied on walking of the customers to the big marketplaces, how they can cope up with this situation, because things are not going to get normal, I say, till end of this year, and then they contribute a lot to the economy in terms of taxation and in terms of services which they provide. So what step they should be taking immediate after opening of this lockdown? Shall they rather be transferring themselves to the digitalization or some new trades they should get in? So how the things will work for them? That's the question I want to ask.
That's a very interesting question, Aman. My advice would basically be that a singular advice: focus on cash. How to generate cash, and how to utilize cash in an optimal fashion. Because for the next 6 months, anybody who can keep his head afloat will be able to survive. Do not look at, and what I have been speaking in many seminars is actually coming out as the headline by various CEOs also. 2020-21 should not be a year of thinking of profits. 2020-21 should be considered as an year of survival by any means possible within the framework of law. And there are various tools available to do it. It's a very difficult period. You talk about smaller shopkeepers, you talk about mid-size brick and mortar stores, or you talk about large industries. Even large industries are not, exempt from this kind of a problem. Even though they are sitting on piles of cash, they are going to face this problem of labor. Where is the labor going to come from on the shop floor? So even if they have cash, where is the manpower to run their factories? So everybody will have its own set of complications and challenges. One shoe will not fit all. Everybody will need to assess what is their biggest area of difficulty and then devise their strategies accordingly. In terms of customers' realizations, I mean, if the customer is not paying, but provided the customer has got that intention to pay when the timing is right, probably one could look at factoring, bill discounting. Obviously, one will have to suffer a higher rate of discount on that, but enough and more financing and factoring agencies are stepping into the market to support people, because that's the kind of a leverage they would be looking at. In terms of brick and mortar stores, it has been, let's say, shut down for the past 30 days, 42 days, zero sales, but then they have certain stocks. They should be focusing on liquidating the stocks and then maintaining the lowest possible inventory to avoid the blockage of working capital. So, different kind of strategies will have to be talked about. If you look at the mid-sized manufacturing organizations or trade organizations, there are two concepts which I would propagate would be very relevant for them. The working capital churn has to be rotated faster and faster to generate your cash. And second is reducing your cash burn position based on your cash flow gap. These two things will probably help them to keep their head afloat in the next 6 months period.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And a business model change, if that's possible, Amandeep.
Change in business model, you say?
Yes, could be anything. Holiday resorts and hotels where you don't have people coming in today. They should be thinking of their physical assets, redeploying physical assets for some other activity. I've been getting messages on my phone from restaurants inviting me to come over and actually check how well sanitized they are. That's what some restaurants are trying to do. Digitization, of course, if you can afford digitization at this time. So look at your cash situation, but also this is a trite saying. You have to think really outside the box today, and see if you can have a different business model to stay afloat for the foreseeable time.
Thank you so much. Yes, you had a question on your side.
Yes, there was one more question in the chat box, and I think a lot of people have the question about employment. We are in lockdown for like 2 months. We will be in lockdown, maybe especially the red zones, for the longer time. We cannot run the factories. Some people are paying the labor for 2 months. It's an issue of cash. How long can we keep on paying the labor? Is there a provision to fire people? What can we do? It's either paying the labor and die, or what is that? Maybe a legal question for the legal expert.
Yeah, sure. Vikas or Ravi, would you like to take that?
Of Ravi?
I'll just make a short comment and then Vikas can take this forward. But just to say, this is a force majeure situation and you are excused for performing your obligation because you're not able to sell. This is a difficult time, but the answer is not really that. You have a legal obligation to pay. You would need to pay. There's a March 29 directive from under the Disaster Management Act, which has a statutory force. So there is an obligation. But the real question is, if you don't have money in your bank, how will you pay?
Yes.
I think that Sandy can tell, like, if you don't have money, how do you pay then? The other question is that, like, how long can you continue to pay? Subject to the constraints of Industrial Disputes Act and the number of workers you have, how many can you terminate? They're saying don't terminate. But then the question is, then you would have to lay them off for non-availability of raw materials. So that's a question. The better opportunity is have a conversation with your workforce. How are you going to be negotiating with them to stay afloat, to keep everybody liquid and pay certain amount of money?
Okay.
Vikas, would you like to add?
Yes.
So legally, I cannot fire them. Legally, I need to pay them. I cannot fire them during COVID. During lockdown, I cannot fire them.
Yes, you have to pay legally. That is what Ravi has mentioned. The only thing is that, the directive which Ravi has talked about, it particularly talks about people in the category of workers. So what we can do is, rather the employers can do is that if they are talking about senior management, then or the people with whom they have an employment contract, they can do some kind of a settlement with them, because that circular will not apply to them. But if so far as workmen are concerned, yes. And again, if the difficulty, as it was mentioned in one of the questions, that the employer is at the verge of getting going to the liquidation. So in my opinion, in that situation, you can't even force the employer to pay. So he has to really be guided by the concept of reasonableness, pay to whatever extent it is possible for him to the worker, and to the senior management he can do some kind of a settlement.
All right.
Do we have any other question? Any urgent question that is being raised by anybody else, Manoj, from your side? Not yet. Okay, fair enough. I think we also come to the end of the discussion in terms of the allotted time that we had. I must say that it was really a pleasure and most enjoyable for me. I would like my colleague and friend Inyas to make some word of thanks and remarks. Inyas, please, if you can just address the thanks. Of course, I thank everyone, but if you can formally do it, that'll be nice.
Sure, Rajiv, thank you. I agree with you. It was a very interesting topic, or a very interesting 1 hour, because we had people from accountancy side, we had people from the legal side, we had a different kind of approaches and topics. It's a difficult situation for all of us. It's about thinking outside the box, maybe throwing the box away, reinventing the box. But for all of us, it's a matter of surviving by keeping the cash. So I think we had some insights. Communication is important. Honest communication with all stakeholders is very important in all situations, with people that are on the payroll, people that are supposed to pay rent. So it's about open communication. And to end this topic, I'd like to thank, first of all, the two organizations who made it possible. First, ASA and the two speakers, and then Ravi Singhania and the two speakers from their law firm. Also the people behind the scenes who have organized this, the IT people. Of course, I'd like to thank the members of BLBA to taking part in this webinar. Till 10 minutes ago, we had 35 participants, which is very good, I must say, because all of us are getting so many emails every day in the inbox for plenty of webinars. I'd like to thank all the members of BLBA that have opted for this BLBA webinar. I also want to say that it's a good format to connect or reconnect with the members, especially when we are not allowed to meet in person. And I think this is a format we can repeat again. I would request the members to send their ideas to Preeti for the next webinar about topics, about what kind of issues they are having. we can organize experts in that field. So I would like to thank everybody for being with us once again, also to the speakers. And I would say, keep safe, be healthy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Himanshu. Thank you, Sandeep. Thank you, Ravi.
Rajiv, I would
Thank you.
like to thank you for taking pains to coordinate this wonderfully. You've done the justice to every speaker, and of course, all the queries have been taken up. So, on behalf of all speakers, I really thank you as well.
I must also say, Himanshu, that we had people from the embassy also who were there. In fact, I just had on the chat box Babette. Babette heads the Flanders desk in Belgian embassy. Flanders, as you know, is one of the economic powerhouses provinces of Belgium. And she was saying that she enjoyed it and she was there throughout in the event. So I think it was really nice for people from the embassy and the diplomatic community to also listen into this. And we hope to take it forward.
All kudos to you and Amit, and of course, the entire panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a nice evening. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.